Well, it's all over. The vote is yes, just like we thought. And now it's time to celebrate. If you're McFarland and Stedman, you're celebrating. If you're a retiree, you're crying. If you're an employee, you're oblivious. You know, I know how they are over there. Most of those Trimet employees are not, I'm talking about the drivers, not paying any attention to any of these politics. They're in their own little bus driver worlds, and I can tell you that, being a former bus driver. I'll never forget the time I walked. Had been about a year since McFarland took over. McFarland had been in charge for about a year. I walked into the Beaverton Transit Center. It was 5 or 6 o'clock, a time when there's a lot of drivers in the room. And I asked right out, I said, I want to ask everybody a question. And I said, who is Neil McFarland? And not one, not even one bus driver knew who he was. And he had been there for a year. And that just tells you what where Trimet bus drivers' heads are at. Anyway, now that that vote is over, let's take a look at, this is Randy Stedman's assistant. Now, I haven't seen this woman before. This is the first time she's come out. She's the financial analyst for Randy Stedman, you see. Every one of these subdirectors have their own little fiefdoms underneath them. So she's going to analyze what this contract actually means in terms of numbers. So let's watch, and I will cut in.
Forecast that is in alignment with the strategic financial plan if historical rates of revenue growth continue. So what we're showing on these two slides are two forecasts. One, a forecast of the status quo, SQ, revenues and expenditures, and that is the current contract terms going forward. And the slide on the right-hand side are the financial results of the tentative agreement going forward. Both forecasts.
Well, as you can see on that little chart there, the two revenues and expenses are actually equal now. The two lines are going in the same direction, whereas the other chart, the lines were a little bit different. It didn't look like a lot, but they were a little bit separated from each other.
Forecasts, the underlying assumptions, economic, ridership, fare, service, capital, pension, and OPEB trust funding assumptions are the same. So what you're looking at here are just the differences between the wages and ATU wages and benefits of the current contract going forward and the tentative agreement going forward. I want to mention that the status quo was the ATU's initial proposal walking into labor negotiations.
And right there is the proof that Bruce conceded. Bruce gave Trimet what it wanted because she just said ATU came into the negotiations with a different proposal than what they're walking out with. Bruce blinked first. I mean, the management was up against the wall, and so was the union. It was just a matter of who was going to blink first. Unfortunately, it was the union. But that's proof that Bruce actually conceded.
The next slide is basically showing the same information on the previous slide, but in a different format. The bars show the differences between revenues and expenditures for the status quo and for the tentative agreement. The little numbers on below the bars or on top of the bars show the months of operating expense in beginning unrestricted fund balance. So this is a key indicator in the strategic finance plan. And what the numbers on the right-hand side of the graph, the tentative agreement shows that we meet the board goal of 2.5 months of beginning of operating expense and beginning unrestricted fund balance throughout the forecast. There is way at the end of the forecast, starting around 2027, when we replace the light rail vehicles, we are beginning to see a little bit we're a little bit off there, but it's still within solvable range. By the time we come back to you in December with the updated financial forecast, that should be solved.
I don't know if you followed that, but apparently we're safe until the year 2027, and then they have to replace the light rail vehicles. Well, by that time I'll be probably dead, so it won't matter.
This graph shows the historical status quo and tentative agreement active and retiree medical expense paid by Trimet. Comparing the red line, which is the status quo, and the blue line, which is the tentative agreement, you can see that the tentative agreement bends the cost curve favorably, although costs increase over time. The actuals between fiscal 1999 and 2012, the average annual growth rate per active and retired employees was 8.1%, and that's shown on the left-hand side of the graph. That's 8.1%, and we chose 2012 because that's when we started to bend the cost curve down with the GABA arbitration decision. On the right-hand side, the average annual growth rate per active and retired employees between 2012 and 2030 under the status quo is 4.8%, and the tentative agreement is 3.7%. The upward slope reflects additional retirees in these years. The next slide shows OPEB, or other post-employment benefits, expense for union retiree medical status quo versus the tentative agreement through 2043. These projections were prepared for us by Milliman in May of 2014, and then they were updated for the changes that we made during negotiations in October. The red line shows the benefits payments for the status quo, and the blue line shows the benefits payments projected for the tentative agreement. So you can see how that line is flattening out over time, and the huge difference in costs there. The next slide shows the impact of the proposed union retiree medical benefits on the OPEB valuation and payouts. Under the status quo, the present value of benefits is $1.392 billion. And the numbers that I'm quoting here are just for the union side of the OPEB liability. The total unfunded liability is $950 million, but we're just comparing the status quo and the tentative agreement union numbers. The present value of benefits under the tentative agreement is $1.024 billion. That's a reduction of $368 million over 30 years. The actuarial accrued liability under the status quo is $869 million. Under the tentative agreement is $641 million. It's been reduced 26%. The normal cost under the status quo is $48 million. The normal cost, and the normal cost is the cost of benefits earned each year. The normal cost under the tentative agreement is $35 million or $13 million lower. The amortization of the unfunded liability under the status quo is $40 million. Under the tentative agreement, that drops to $29.5 million. Most importantly, the benefits payments themselves, the 30-year payouts under the status quo were projected by Milliman to be $2.1 billion. The 30-year payouts projected by Milliman for the tentative agreement are $1.3 billion. They've been reduced 37%. Under the status quo, the benefits payments are not affordable, and what we've achieved under the tentative agreement is going forward, we're going to be able to afford the promised benefit. Under the tentative agreement, in addition, by making the changes to new hires, we've avoided $375 million in costs not included in the actuarial valuation.
So again, your bargaining team is comprised of those members of the district, and we recommend ratification of this. I think it's important to note that while we have made substantial progress here. Our costs do still go up over time. But we have bent the cost curve down to a level that's manageable and under the normal give and take of labor relations going forward. So we're pleased that we were able to reach agreement with the ETU on this tentative agreement.
Well, okay, you have it there. According to them, everything's fine, right? That's it. You won, and now everything's affordable. And as far as us retirees, hey, we're all right as long as we don't get sick. It's not going to be a problem. But if you get sick as a retiree, you've lost your pension. And that's the thing that the news media hasn't covered, refuses to cover, and will never cover. The news media, being a mouthpiece for big government and big business, will not allow any information to get out that will show big business or big government as being inhuman or cruel. But according to these people, everything's supposed to be fine now. All we had to do is give up that medical, and we'll be fine. And, well, like I say, just don't get sick.
Center. Free breast reduction. Free glasses every year. The nutritionist. No lifetime limit. And no copay. And the taxpayer gets to pay for all of it.